So, this is one of those situations. We started by talking to Desiree McGraw about what's been happening in Côte-des-Neiges and some businesses there. Another incident today of a business in NDG on Monkland Avenue being targeted by pro-Palestinian forces, this time because apparently there is a list circulating now of Jewish-owned businesses, not just here, but in other parts of the country that are being targeted. And we'll talk more about that
they
when
had
we
their
have
food
the information.
Trucks, the windows all got smashed. I just want to say it's Pigeon Cafe on Monkland. It's a great little place. I go there regularly. I highly recommend frequent these businesses even more. Please support them.
The idea is, as I think Desiree McGraw said, is, this is not a time to back away. This is a time to step up and say, we do support these businesses. We do not support anybody who decides to go after them for some misguided sense of, I'm not even sure what, justice of some kind. But look, let me say, while protests and demonstrations, we've said this before, they're a legal and important part of a healthy democracy, right? But the right to free speech is not absolute. So I think the question now that a lot of us are asking is, at what point do the authorities need to step up and enforce the rules when they need to be enforced? Where does a protest cross the line from protected speech to unlawful incitement? Pearl Eliadis is a Montreal-based human rights lawyer. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of Law at McGill, and she's on the line. Pearl, thanks so much for being here this afternoon.
Not at all.
I know this is a big question. I'm not sure there's an easy answer here, but we're living with these demonstrations now. It would seem on an almost daily basis. They have gone from demonstrations to now businesses being vandalized to bullets being fired at Jewish institutions. So where does it stop, and what are the authorities going to do, if anything?
So the law is actually really clear, Aaron. The law about vandalism, about attacking public property, misdemeanors around or offenses with regard to riots or planning riots. All of these things are completely illegal. It's in the criminal code already. The right to peaceful assembly is subject to the word peaceful, so it has to be peaceful. The minute it's not peaceful, it loses its constitutional protection. And with regard to free expression, any form of expression that is violent is automatically carved out of the protections from the Canadian Charter, and any form of speech that is considered to be hate speech, and the Supreme Court of Canada has issued a whole bunch of rulings on this, is also not protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the law is actually quite clear.
Even on hate speech, because I feel like that's where it gets a little blurry or unclear. Like, what are the laws around hate speech? How do you determine what is hate speech?
So there's provisions in the criminal code, so Section 318 of the criminal code that specifically deals with incitement to hate and actual hateful speech. So that's in the criminal code. There are also provisions with regard to discriminatory speech that could be a complaint before the Quebec Human Rights Commission. And the standard that the court has developed with regard to hate speech is speech that publicly vilifies individuals, groups of individuals in relation to, for example, their race or their religion or their disability or any of the grounds that we know about, their gender. And that makes it necessary for them to even argue for their humanity. Arguments about how people are leading to the end of civilization, how they prey on, we've had this, for example, with attacks on LGBTQ plus people, that they prey on children, that they're predators. This kind of language that makes people seem subhuman. That's the kind of thing the court has said is hate speech. So hate speech is not protected by Section 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the right to freedom of expression. And at the same time, there's a whole bunch of things that are being touted as being hate speech that aren't. So you're right to say that in the public mind, I think there's a fair amount of blurry lines.
So, when you hear blurry lines, you begin to realize that the authorities here, if they're going to do something, it's taken a lot for anything to happen. And in this particular case, at least that's what's happening in Montreal, we've not seen any arrests. We've not seen, at least from my knowledge, not seen anyone charged. Are you surprised by that from what you have seen so far?
I am. I suspect that the police and the authorities are still figuring out what to do. After the event yesterday morning at the yeshiva in Côte-des-Neiges, I spoke with one of the Quebec officials on public security who said that they're not disclosing any information on the investigation, so there may be things going on that I'm and many of us may not be familiar with. But I think the bigger question, Aaron, in terms of the public protests is so any kind of vandalism against businesses or the Pigeon Cafe that you were referring to earlier, completely illegal. Need to find out who those people are, arrest them. I mean, but the broader issues around protests and how to deal with it when you've got sort of tens of thousands, thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, so as not to provoke a riot and people not getting hurt. These are real issues that the police, I know, are grappling with on a daily basis. But any form of violence on its face, assault, vandalism, clearly outside the realm of anything that's protected by the Charter.
Okay, so that's giving me a little bit of clarity here, because I was trying to understand why in some circumstances and environments some things are tolerated and then in others they're very much not. But it sounds to me like the goal is to maintain peace.
The goal, the police, I'm not speaking for the police here, and I have no,
yes, fair enough.
Sort of red phone into what the police are doing. But the police have a really tough job here, which is on the one hand to make sure that people stay safe, but on the other hand not to react to public demonstrations in a way that will actually provoke riots. And so finding that fine balance is tough, and I don't envy them their job.
I would ask just one thing I know that came up a couple of weeks ago in the town of Hampstead, for example. I know the mayor there made it illegal now for you to take down a poster, perhaps one of the missing hostages. And I'm not sure that there's a lot of legal basis for that. What was your sort of reaction to that?
So my understanding or my guess, because I haven't seen the actual bylaw, is that this is actually a generic bylaw with regard to the city having the authority to put up posters that they have been approved, but there wasn't anything, as I understand it, in the municipal bylaws that prevented taking down of posters. I actually had a comment on this earlier, which was that if the way that this was being advertised, the way this was being sort of discussed with the population, was that it was only with regard to the posters of the hostages, right? And the question was, why are we talking about it with regard to one thing when that's actually not what the bylaw says, right? So I'm sympathetic to the idea that we want to, put up a certain kind of viewpoint, but the bylaw is clearly not reflected by the advertising that was done of it. The bylaw is not about specifically the hostages, a point that I think it was Mr. Levy made, when he was talking about this. But the way in which that this was promoted and advertised and set out was, we are putting up these posters with regard to the Israeli hostages, and anyone who takes them down, and this was a suggestion in the statement he made, is engaged in hate speech, or that hate speech is somehow involved. And I'm not aware of any precedent in Canada that says that is hate speech. And in fact, public officials in Côte-des-Neiges and in NDG said that they would take down the posters because they're not in their municipality. So is that hate speech?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. So then I wonder, is it too specific to ask you, Pearl, about the chant that has been heard at some of these protests from the river to the sea, and how some people have deemed it to be hate speech and others say no, not at all?
So I've never lived in Israel. I've never lived in Gaza. I've never worked in the occupied territories, and I can't comment on that at all. And I think it's really important that people only talk about things they know about. So, but I would say that, in Rwanda, which I may feel like a stretch, but just bear with me for 1 second, there was a sort of phrase that was used in terms of how the Tutsi were being treated in around 1992, where a public figure whose name was Leon Mugesera said, well, we're going to put them in the river. We're going to put these Tutsi in the river. And he argued in a Supreme Court of Canada hearing that simply meant that he was going to take the Tutsi and put them in an organized riverboat cruise down the river, right? Well, in fact, when he spoke to people about what the coding of this actually meant, it turned out that it was actually linked to genocidal acts where Tutsi had been murdered and thrown into the river. And you have to know the context and the political context to know really what's going on and what this coding means and if it's dog whistle for something else. I simply don't know, but I think we need to be careful about the fact that people are saying it means different things, and I don't think most of us, if we haven't lived there, at least speaking for myself, I can't say what it means. I do think we need to be careful about these interpretations.
Pearl, we very much appreciate your time. I have a feeling we'll be talking about this again, the way things are going. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good to talk to you both. Take care.
Pearl Eliadis, human rights lawyer. And
good.
Yeah. And the question again is, some of this will be interpretation, as she said. When will authorities decide to move? If they do, once these protests get out of hand, if they get out of hand. And to the question we asked right off the top, when you talk about police and the authorities here, our police chief has been MIA on this.
He's on vacation.
He's not even here. There have been no statements from him. Well, so you kind of wonder what's going on.
My real issue is, okay, if he's on an extended, not if, we know he's on an extended vacation until the end of the month. But then someone else is in charge, and where the hell are they?
Haven't heard a word.